Hi everybody and welcome to this video, which is going to be looking at emerging and developing economies, which is theme 4 and the third topic in the unit theme 4. Right, so you've got here the part of the specification which we're going to be looking at throughout this video. So we're going to be looking at how do we measure development, and then looking at the factors that influence both growth and development within an economy. This here, strategies influencing growth and development, will be a future video looking at this topic. Right, okay, so question 1, what I would like you to do, please, is to jot down these 3 different questions in your book. So 1A, 1B, 1C. Hit pause, write down your answers and hit play once you've put down what you think are the answers to these questions. So hit pause now, please. Right, everyone, now welcome back. Now, first of all, let's just think about some good introductory key terms linked to this topic. We often sort of differentiate between countries by looking at income status. So we have what we call the high income or the developed first world economies. Now here we're looking at countries in Western Europe, so the UK, Germany, France, Spain. We have in North America, America and Canada. We then look towards Australasia, so Australia, New Zealand, Japan would also come into that category as well. Middle income economies are what we call second world countries. So these aren't as wealthy as the high income countries, but they're moving towards this status quite frequently. So we're looking here at countries in Eastern Europe. So this could be Poland, etc., the Czech Republic. We then have the BRIC economies, which is Brazil, Russia, India and China. So these are economies that have gone through lots of growth in recent years, and they're moving towards high income status. We then have the low income or the less developed or the third world economies, and these are generally dominated in Africa. So the vast majority of African economies are what we call less developed or third world economies. And we can also have those something we call emerging economies. So this is what before, these are the middle income economies, which are fastly moving towards high income status. So these are what we call newly industrialized countries. Right, okay, now what I now want to go through is the difference between economic growth and economic development. Now, growth you should be really, really comfortable with from theme 2. It's measured by an increase in real GDP. So it's the national income of the economy increasing. Development is more about living standards. So it's about measuring the economic welfare of people within an economy. So it's about people's ability to satisfy wants and needs. Now, the assumption would be that when economies grow, we should experience economic development. So in other words, a growth in GDP should lead to better economic welfare. And the rationale is as output levels increase across the economy, it means there's more jobs being created, incomes start to increase, people start to build not more income, but more wealth as well. This will create further jobs for other people to do. Now, what this will also then do, it will create the trickle-down effect. So businesses grow and expand. It creates not higher jobs for people and better incomes. It leads to more tax revenue being collected by the government, which means the government can provide more merit goods such as healthcare and education, which means people can satisfy more wants and needs. They've got increased human capital, which means they've got more ability to apply for better paid jobs in the future. So all these things should lead to better economic development. We've got to be a bit careful, though, that growth alone does not guarantee development. So what I would say is that growth is probably essential for development because more output does create more jobs and more tax money, etc. But growth alone doesn't guarantee development. And that is because growth on its own is just a very crude measurement. It looks at the output of the economy increasing. So it takes no account of what is being produced in the country. So, for example, if an economy is just producing lots of extra defence equipment, bombs, etc., then these things aren't going to improve living standards. So if we're looking at what's produced, you generally want to have more merit goods being produced. So if growth is fueled by more housing, better infrastructure, more education, more and better healthcare, then that would hopefully correlate with better living standards. We've also got to be thinking about how it's been produced. More growth could lead to, more emissions, more pollution, more waste, exploiting more workers. So if growth is creating more development, then hopefully growth is leading to an improvement in the environment, using up less non-renewable resources, etc. We're improving the working conditions of staff. We're giving them higher rates of pay. And then finally, who has it been produced for? If the extra growth is just lining the pockets of the rich, then it's not doing much for the vast majority of people in the economy. So what we would say is that growth, if it's going to improve development, should be producing more merit goods. It should be promoting sustainability and enhancing the environment, and it should be benefiting everybody, not just the rich. So in other words, it needs to be pro-poor. Right, so what I would now like to is to think about these questions here. So write down question 2, A, B, C, and D. Hit pause, put down your answers, and once you've put down your answers, hit play, please. Right, okay, now the most common way of measuring economic development in our economy is to look at something called the Human Development Index, the HDI. Now, what the HDI will do, it will rank every country from 0, which is no development, to 1, which will be full development. So what it will do, it will factor in 3 different indicators of development: education, health, and real GNI per capita. So if we're thinking about these 3 different measurements, incomes are extremely important. The logic would be the higher the average income in the country, the better the living standards would be, because more people can access more wants and needs. Health, life expectancy at birth. So the logic would be that if people are living longer, they can access better food, they've got access to healthcare, and all the different things that you need, such as clean drinking water, to give you a long, healthy life. Education, we look at the mean or the average number of years at school for an adult, aged 25 or over. And we also look at the expected number of years at school that people new into the education system can expect. So these 2 measurements give us an idea of the quality of the skills of the human capital of the country. So that would mean that an economy with high mean years at school, high years of expected schooling, high life expectancy, and high real GNI per capita would have better living standards and therefore higher development than countries that don't have those different things there. Now, some of the advantages of the HDI then is what we call multi-dimensional. So what it does, it includes 3 overall big indicators of economic development. So education, health, and incomes. And these 3 things should correlate with lots of other things across the economy as well. So the better these 3 things are, the more opportunities people probably get. The more able people are to access healthcare and good food supplies, opportunities. So these 3 things will correlate with lots of important measurements of living standards in an economy. It also allows for easy comparison between countries, not just right here, right now, but over time as well. So because every country is given a score from 0 to 1, we can track progress over time, and we can look at progress between economies as well. Now, there are some problems with it though. It doesn't factor in inequality. So real GNI per capita, even with purchasing power parity, for example, doesn't consider inequality within the economy. But what I would say, there is something called the IHDI. This is an inequality adjusted human development index, which tries to factor in the level of inequality within an economy. So if they believe inequality was really, really high, you would downgrade their HDI score to factor that in. Another problem is it only really includes a limited number of variables. So it might be multi-dimensional, but it makes no account really of the quality of the environment of the country, how happy people are. So it's a decent measurement, but it's never going to be a foolproof measurement of economic development. Now you've got up on the screen here some other things that we can look at to measure economic development in an economy. So a lot of people would argue gross domestic product, GDP and GNI, are decent measurements. So you can divide these by population, you can factor in price levels, exchange rate variations by looking at PPP. But again, they take no account of what's produced, how it's produced, and for whom it's produced. The Lorenz curve and Gini coefficients can be quite useful, because what we can do is we can look at inequality within an economy. And this will give us a rough idea of the absolute and relative poverty rates within an economy. We can also use the IHDI, which what we said before, we look at the human development index and we factor in the level of inequality. We can look at something called the multi-dimensional poverty index, And this will look at all sorts of different statistics about an economy, such as nutrition. So, you know, the calories that children consume, their ability to meet all their different food intake needs, looking at the carbohydrates, their nutrients, etc. It also factors in not just education, but the school attendance. We could even then look at the living standards for how people cook their food. Can people access clean drinking water? Have they got electricity in their houses? What's the housing like within that economy? So that's a much more deeper way of measuring development. The problem is, though, that gathering that data can be extremely complex. Another one is looking at mobile phone ownership. So looking at number of people per 1,000 of the population have got mobile phones. And this gives us a rough idea of, you know, the access to technology and luxuries within an economy. So the idea is, everyone, we've got lots and lots of different ways of measuring development within an economy. The most commonly recognised accepted one, though, is the Human Development Index. Right, next question. We're now moving on to the barriers to growth and development. So what you could do, you could think about those third world economies, those that dominate Africa. What are the barriers that stop their economies from improving? So try and list as many different barriers that you can remember linked to this topic. So hit pause, and once you've put down your list, hit play and compare what you've done against what I think the answer should be. Right, everyone, now you've got here two really, really important factors that can often prevent growth and development. So we've got here we call primary product dependency and something we call the volatility of commodity prices. Now, what you tend to find is that in the world's poorest economies, their economies tend to be dominated by industries linked to land resources. So this could be mining fuel, so mining extraction, that type of thing, whether it be oil or coal or gas, or it's food. So it's farming sector, exporting tea or soya beans, etc. Now, the problem with these commodities is that they are often low value added goods. So in other words, when you dig them out of the ground or you grow them, there's not a lot else you can do to them to generate additional incomes. That therefore means that when these things are exported, it will often mean that the export earnings tend to be very, very low on these products. And that limits the injection of cash and the earnings available within the economy. Another problem as well is that these products tend to fluctuate massively in price. Now, because the prices fluctuate based on global markets and what people are prepared to pay for these things across the world, it often means that the people that grow them have got very limited ability to work out what they will earn when they plant their crops. And that means that these guys often struggle to plan future incomes. And if their incomes are unstable, then they can't borrow against that to fund better capital, etc. And this will create massive economic instability. So if export prices fall massively, then the country's GDP will also fall massively. Now, another problem is that these products are what we call income inelastic. So when global GDP increases, you tend to find that these prices do not grow in line with global inflation and GDP. But the things these countries import, which are more luxury goods, which could be technology and capital, those prices tend to grow quickly over time. So the problem now is that their import prices, the technology, the capital they need to grow and improve their economy, will increase more significantly in price over time than the things that they export. So it means their imports that they need to bring into their economy often become more and more expensive for them to buy. So they struggle to access the things they need going forward. Another big problem, their exports lack diversity. If you're only exporting coal or tea or coffee, it means that if that industry struggles financially across the world, you've got very limited other exports to fall back on. So their exports lack diversity. Now, the one about volatility of commodity prices, when you export these commodities, you are exporting what we call an homogeneous product. Now, all that means is you're exporting an identical product. So tea is tea, coffee is coffee, tobacco is tobacco, etc. So the prices will fluctuate depending on supply and demand across the world. Now, if these export prices fluctuate massively, again, it creates instability, and that could make it very difficult to predict future incomes, future GDP, And this might prevent foreign firms wanting to invest into your economy. So you're not going to get what we call the foreign direct investment coming in. Right, now the Harrod-Domar model is another problem that poor economies face. Now what the Harrod-Domar model says is that if you want to grow your economy, you need to have high levels of savings taking place in your country. Look at the diagram. If there's more savings taking place, it means that banks have more funds available to invest into households and businesses. If more investment takes place, it means that firms are able to upgrade their capital, so buy better machinery, upgrade their infrastructure, and that would allow them to increase their output, create more jobs, employ more people, which leads to more incomes, which raises ability for more households to save. Now, the problem is that poor economies get stuck in what we call a low-level equilibrium trap. Because people are poor, they're unable to save. But also, people often lack financial identity, which means they don't have bank accounts. On top of that as well, people don't trust the financial institutions of their country. They're worried their money might go missing if they were to deposit in the bank. So the idea is here that people in these economies are very poor, and if they do save, the money's not saved in a bank, it will be hidden somewhere around their property. Now, because people are therefore not savings in banks, it means that there is no funds available for the financial firms to lend out for investment purposes. This therefore means that there is no entrepreneurs because people can't borrow to fund investment into new businesses. This therefore means that these firms cannot buy the capital and the infrastructure they need to expand their output. And if there's no expansion in output, it means that productivity is not improving, and it means that incomes can't increase. Okay, so due to a lack of savings, the economy gets stuck in this third world status. Right, now the next one, foreign currency gap. Now think about the problem here. For many developing economies, they don't tend to export very much. So they're exporting generally commodities or low value goods and services. Now this means that they're not generating or not earning enough foreign currency. So you earn foreign currency by selling your exports overseas. So what developing economies would like is a big pool of access to American dollars, euros, British pounds, etc. And that would allow them to buy imports from those different economies. So they need those imports of capital to expand and improve their economies. If they can't earn our currency, they cannot buy from our countries. And that therefore, again, limits growth and development in their countries. Now, another problem is something that we call capital flight. And this is a problem linked to both political and economic instability. Within all poor economies, there will be people that have money, very, very wealthy people. But you tend to find those with lots of money within these economies don't want to keep their money in their economy. So what they will do, they will invest their wealth into other economies across the world. So people in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, would rather chuck their currency into Britain or Europe or America. Now, the reasons are it could be that there's better returns available on those investments overseas. But further to that, what they're worried about is how secure their wealth is within their economy. For all they know, at any point in time, the government, which might be quite weak or a dictatorship, might take their money off of them. So they chuck it somewhere it's safer. Now, obviously, if that money's leaving their economy, it's stopping that money from creating investment opportunities within their own country. Now, the next one is demographic factors. You tend to find that in developing economies that they tend to have increasingly aging populations. So if you've got more elderly people, you've got more dependents that have got to be supported by those that are working. And that takes away from the abilities of those that are working to meet their own wants and needs because they're looking after mum and dad, etc., to invest in education and healthcare. And then linked to this one as well, though, is you tend to find that in developing economies, women are negatively discriminated against. They can't access education, which means they can't enhance their skills. And that holds back their human capital, which means that they can't access better paid jobs across the economy. And that means that half your workforce remain low skilled because they cannot access the skills that they need to improve. Now, another problem is what we call geography. And we often look here linked to a landlocked country. So, for example, Burundi in Africa is surrounded by other countries that have no, so it has no coasts. And that means it's very difficult for those economies that are landlocked to export goods across the world because they cannot get things to ports easily. Transporting things to ports will suddenly cost more money. They've got to take their goods through other economies to get to ports, and that will inflate their cost of production and can lower their international competitiveness. Also, importing will become difficult if you've got to bring your imports from other countries to get them into your economy. This will push up prices that domestic people pay. And now also linked to this though as well in geography, if all of your neighbours are very, very poor economies, then your opportunity to grow and expand and export to these economies is also very limited. So economies that have got very rich, successful neighbours on their doorsteps tend to find they can use their economies to grow into those economies there to boost their exports. A few more debts. If an economy has very high national debt, it means that tax revenue is being used to pay that debt, pay the interest on that debt, rather than funding better education and healthcare and infrastructure. So that holds back potential economic growth in these economies. What makes it worse, though, as well, is that in these economies, you tend to find a lot of people don't pay tax. So not only is taxation limited, which means that you can't fund public spending, it also means whatever tax money you are generating is paying off debt rather than benefiting the economy through better economic growth. Another problem is access to credit and banking. Not only do poor people in developing economies not save in banks, they have a lack of financial identity, which means they don't have a credit rating. They have no proof they exist legitimately across some of their economies. And that means it's very difficult for these guys to borrow safely. So that means, again, investment becomes very, very difficult for these people to do. So borrowing is almost impossible for poor people in developing economies. Poor infrastructure. So we're not just talking about what I would call transport infrastructure, road, rail and ports. We're talking about power supplies, access to water. Now, if you can't access good infrastructure, then it means that your economy lacks competitiveness. It means there'll be a low demand for your exports across the world. It means that your businesses cannot compete globally with foreign goods coming into your economy. Well, that holds back job creation. And if you've got poor transport infrastructure, people struggle to commute bigger distances for work, which means you've got more geographical immobility of labour. Now, also as well, education and skills. If people lack skills and education, then your human capital is poor, which means workers will be poor productive workers, and they're not able to use high-skilled capital. And again, that will prevent your economy from improving economic growth and development. Last two, absence of property rights. People in developing economies might own a property, they might own a piece of land, but you tend to find that in these economies, we don't have very strong legal systems, which means that people might lack proof that they own these resources. So you might have been farming a piece of land for 50 years or living in a property for 3 generations, but if you cannot prove you own that property or that piece of land, you cannot use that as collateral to borrow. And again, that makes it very difficult for these people to access the finance they need to improve their living standards. So buying more capital, buying education, buying healthcare, etc. Now, the final one is what we call non-economic factors, and this is often linked to weak governments. So if your economy is full of corruption, if you've got lots of civil wars which destroys infrastructure, if you've got governments that don't make efficient decisions, then all these different things will hold back growth and development within your economy. Right, guys, well, that's the end of the video. So I'm going to hang up there.